Dick Grayson has had a troubled past, with his family dying and his fallout with Batman, but I have to ask, what are those? So Red Hood wasn't exactly the only Gotham Knights McFarlane that I picked up. I also managed to find Nightwing, and I mean, he was there. He was there. I figured, you know what, I can at least extract some content out of this. And then I also came up with the idea that even though I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Nightwing, one of my best friends is, Surface Assassin over there from Twitch, hit him up. But basically, I figured, okay, I could take him home and compare him in the same vein that I did with the Arkham Knight Batman from McFarlane Toys versus the DC Collectibles version. I could pretty much compare the Gotham Knights Nightwing to the DC Collectibles Nightwing from Arkham City. Now, I know that they're completely different developers, different design aesthetics and choices, but they're still within the game verse of the Batman universe, so to speak, and they are from those two competing brands as far as toy manufacturers and exactly, what does better with what, etc. So we're going to be doing a review of this guy as well as a comparison. So things are about to get a little bit on the spicy side. In the meantime, though, let's take a look at McFarlane Toys Nightwing from the new Gotham Knights game that's set to come out on October 25th. And overall, the choices for the design here, outside of the purview of McFarlane, but more so on the purview of Warner Brothers Montreal, who's going to be developing the game, you can see that I'm not exactly a huge fan of this design choice. I don't know what it is about Nightwing here, but it just looks very makeshift. Like, I get that all of the aesthetic branding for Nightwing is there as far as the blue Nightwing kind of symbol there on his chest, very exaggerated and much larger than traditional Nightwing aesthetical choices. And of course, he's got the predominant black military type, well, maybe not military, but very tactical suit that's predominantly black with the accents of that very dark royal blue, so to speak. And that's generally Nightwing's colors and design choices. It's just that I just don't know what it is about the way that everything looks. But like I said, it just looks like a bunch of motorcycle gear just strapped on. And I know that's a common analogy or meme that runs with an awful lot of superhero type of costumes and design choices, especially when we're talking about the movies where it's like, oh, it just looks like motorcycle gear. That's honestly one of the things that a lot of people said about Robert Pattinson's Batman with that when that design first leaked out with that test footage. It's like, oh, it looks like motorcycle gear on his shoulder pads, but over time we grew to like it. I have yet to hit my point where I'm growing to like Nightwing's aesthetic here. Overall, the torso area doesn't look really too bad. It looks rather well proportioned, and like I said, you get quite an awful lot of detail when it comes to a little bit of that padding going around and the coating, the rubber piece that's mainly made out of the central area here. So overall, it doesn't look inherently bad. It's just that, at a matter of preference, I would have liked my Nightwing to look just a little bit more badass, and he just is lacking that X factor. That comes through a little bit more when it comes to the legs. As soon as I took him out of the packaging, I was like, yo, is my guy skipping leg day here? Because it's looking a little bare bones, no pun intended there. But there's something about the legs that just looks just so generic. It just looks like very generic pants as far as the design. Now, in terms of how McFarlane was able to translate that over to figure type, it's very conventional for McFarlane to be able to sculpt out a design such as this. You just got the traditional padding going around, you got a little bit of blue accent there along with the knee pads and the sculpting with the creases of the pants, etc. So obviously, like I said, this kind of issue goes all the way to the top of the actual design team behind Warner Brothers Montreal. So McFarlane can't really be blamed too badly about this figure right here. There's only so much that I can really say versus the quality of the plastic. I just find it a little curious that upon examining the figure, when we get to the legs, the only issue that McFarlane kind of created here when designing the figure is actually having the L and the R for the right and leg knee joints to actually be very, very obvious within the inside portions of the legs here. I'll cut to a close-up. But basically, you can see an L and an R to pretty much give away which joint is which one. And I'm like, I've never seen that in a McFarlane before. Why are we cutting it to it now? So it is a little strange. It kind of breaks the illusion of the figure. If anything, have that be on the inside, not on the outside here, where it's very within view. Then we get to his kicks. Look at those things. Jordans, they are not. And again, this goes back to Warner Bros. Montreal, so more so than McFarlane. McFarlane was just following the template and molding it out and putting it out in line with the merchandising for Gotham Knights. I don't like these shoes. I don't know what it is, but it just kind of emphasizes more my complaint about how makeshift this overall design of Nightwing really is, which is a shame because I've seen interpretations of Nightwing before that genuinely look badass. Case in point, the Arkham City version, which we'll get to in a second. It's even more detrimental to then note that as I navigated the figure and moved on over here to the arm areas, they're very weirdly placed as far as having kind of like that girth. I can't put my finger on it, considering that I can't really put my finger anywhere considering this injury, but there's something about the way they sculpted out these arms. Now, this is where McFarlane does come into a little bit at fault here, because it's one thing for the design to not have the blue connect here, like Nightwing traditionally has on his costume. It's another for the arms to be sculpted in a way where they just look like they're protruding out all the time. He kind of has like this angular arching look to his overall shoulders and arms, and as much as I try to situate it within the joints, which we'll cover during the articulation, the only real way to get him kind of flush is to kind of bend a little here on the inwards part of the bicep and kind of have this going on, but then he just looks broken. He just looks, I don't know what it is, but he just looks way too rigid and skeletal in a way where it just doesn't look natural. It really doesn't. So if we were to relax, quote unquote, the elbows, then he looks like this. Like I said, it looks like his arms are just kind of coming off to the side. Nothing looks natural. Nothing looks organic. And on top of that, you also have the head sculpt, which doesn't look too bad, except it bears just a slight resemblance to that of Robert Pattinson, so I don't know if there's a little bit of recycled use of the design or the actual 3D print, especially when it comes to the actual jawline that he's got going on right there. Everything else is able to feel a little bit more distinct, especially when they were able to sculpt out the mask, which actually looks generally good as far as the sculpting of the mask and the paint applications within the eyes. They actually look pretty good, as well as the sculpting behind the hair. Just like I mentioned with the Drifter Bruce Wayne, that as much as I had an awful lot of negative to say about that face design, at least they got the hair right. The hair actually looked legitimately well done. And the same could kind of be said here for Nightwing. The hair is actually sculpted and meticulously etched out and colored brimly with the dark paint application there, that it actually translates very well, especially with that little bit of cowlick going along right here at the top of his hairline right there. It's just that the rest of the face, doesn't scream Nightwing to me, but of course, that's another thing that we can fault Warner Bros. Montreal as far as design choices. The only thing that I think McFarlane could have etched out a little bit better is just the way that these arms just kind of rest on the side of the body, because in order to be able to fidget with that, you need to mess with the articulation, which we'll cover now. The head, of course, it can rotate 360 degrees, as it is right there, as well as pivot inwards about that much and be able to flex up towards the sky only about that far. So there's quite a bit of leeway, especially the way that the backside of his head is kind of cut out. It allows for that joint to move fluidly in that manner, and some slight tilting from left to right, as you see right about right there. So head joints continue to not really disappoint over from McFarlane, so that's a good thing. Then we get to the arms, where due to the way that this rubber piece is one centralized piece here in the middle, but it's not really interfering with the shoulders, you can rotate the arms 360 degrees vertically, as well as be able to extend to the sides. Mine had somewhat of a loose joint or hinge when it comes to extension on the left. It's the right one that's actually full-on ratcheted to the point where you have to give it a little bit of extra force, as you can kind of see right there. The left one, not so much. It just kind of moves inwards and outwards. In fact, it's almost not even ratcheted at all. That's pretty strange. But thankfully, the butterfly joint on the inside doesn't really make itself quite known as far as being able to see it, but as you can see, it does allow for the ball joint inside of the shoulder to be able to shrug upwards, downwards, and even from the there you go. So you kind of have to fidget with it a little bit, but you can see the butterfly joint protruding a little bit right there, allowing the whole ball joint to be able to flex and shrug in full motion right about right there, left, right, up, and down. So that's very, very, very good to see. you like to see it. I just wish that in terms of sculpting, we were able to kind of get this overall orientation of the arm right, which is so far my biggest complaint about this figure thus far. Then we move on to the biceps, which allow full rotation 360 degrees, and good thing that it does, because again, that's the only real way to get the arms to be as flush as possible. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. However, you do get 2 joints at the elbow once more to allow full bending all the way up until there. So there you have that. And then, of course, you got the ball joint at the wrist that allows the wrist to be able to rotate 360 degrees, as well as the hinge on the inside to be able to flex the wrist inwards and outwards about that far. Now, even though I keep mentioning that this whole part right here is one rubber piece, it does cut out right here on the middle portion, and they do a good job of fleshing it in to kind of blend it and make it seem like it's all one giant rubber piece from the neck to pretty much the waistline. But it does cut right here to allow the mid-torso joint to be able to rotate left and right, as you see right there. More than likely it goes the full 360, but I am hearing a little bit of squeaky in there, so I'm not going to force it all too badly there, especially since I don't know if I'm really going to keep this figure, but we'll see. Then we get to the top of the legs, which could of course flex all the way forward about that much at an even 90-degree angle, only about that much back. I do notice that the left leg does extend a little bit more backwards, despite the rubber ass piece here on the back, because you can see a little bit of the plastic kind of cutting out right there and ruining the illusion, so to speak, right there at the top of the left leg. But you could extend them with the ratcheted joint almost a full perpendicular 180. This is honestly, I don't know if it's because of the way that the waist piece is molded, but there's much more room to be able to fully extend the legs. Then again, this is meant to be Dick Grayson, part of the Flying Graysons. So, yeah, it totally makes sense for the character to be able to do the splits. This is part of his act. Anyways, moving on. You could, of course, bend the knee at both joints right here that they give this McFarlane figure once more, and they're very, very fluid. So, however, despite the fluidness, mine still has a little bit of ratchet. It's just a little bit more on the softer side. But you could extend the knees like so, and then of course you got the ankles, which allow the kicks, the bootleg Nikes, to be able to rotate 360 degrees horizontally, as well as pivot downwards, and only about that much upwards, only because of the way that the pants and the shins are designed right here with the extra padding, except they put this extra notch right here, and that kind of comes into interference with the ankle joints. So you could flex all the way backwards like so, but then when you move it upwards, it just stops right about right there. Same is the case with the other ankle, unfortunately. And yes, make no mistake, the Flying Graysons would not be as agile, or at least he wouldn't be as agile. The rest I can't really speak for, but he's definitely able to keep his footing about with the toesies. Now, even though we all have a few things to say about McFarlane, they still are able to go out of their way to add extra joints of articulation, some of which I don't really even find on some other toy lines, even some of the competitors like Hasbro and whatnot. Which is why it is time to then bring on the other former boy wonder, so to speak, and that's of course going to be the DC Collectibles Nightwing from Arkham City. Now, of course, there's going to be a size differentiator right there, as this is meant to be a 7-inch figure and this is the traditional 6-inch, and the articulation is definitely dwarfed by the McFarlane, because here they have the coveted 22 points of articulation, and over here I can't remember the exact number, but you can blatantly see that we're missing quite an awful lot going on the knees. There's only one joint. There's absolutely no waist or torso articulation of any kind. And then the elbows only sport one right there to be able to bend a full 90-degree angle, and then not much really going on elsewhere. And I do have a separate video where I cover this, as well as other Arkham City figures that I have as part of my collection, such as Harley Quinn and Scarecrow from Arkham Asylum and Robin, the Tim Drake version from Arkham City. So you guys go ahead and check out that other video. I'll probably post a card right about right here. But when it comes to actually comparing this to the new Gotham Knights Nightwing, one thing I can definitely say is that, of course, I'm going to be loving that aesthetic. I do like the shade of blue better on the Gotham Knights version. There's something about this baby blue that I'm not exactly a huge fan of. I've always liked the much darker, more muted version of the blue on versions of this character here, but I just wish we would have this exact design choice when it comes to the actual symbol on his chest that actually bleeds over to the shoulders and becomes one with the shoulders and the arm pieces. It all just fluidly kind of carries over here to the side as the traditional Nightwing suit tends to be. Whereas over here, it's just the symbol on the front, and then it just becomes this huge amalgamation of generic tactical gear. Over here, it actually looks like a legitimate superhero suit. You have definition going along with the chest, the abs, and his shoulders are very profound. He looks like he's got some confidence, whereas Gotham Knights Nightwing, I don't know what it is, but he just looks kind of hunched over. It looks like he's always looking down unless I kind of pivot up the head like so. Then it looks like he's facing forwards more accurately. Otherwise, you know, he just looks like a dude that's covering up what could be potential, I don't know, like, you know, maybe he's lacking muscle or something like that, or trying to compensate, but it just doesn't look 100% all that as heroic as his former counterpart here from Arkham City. So you can definitely see where I'm leaning as far as design choices are concerned. Now, the actual quality of the head sculpt is a little better on the Gotham Knights, but again, the design choices with the Arkham City, the long hair I can kind of give or take, but at least the mask, the way that the mask actually looks on the head is, in my opinion, just a little bit more favorable to that version of the Batman universe as opposed to the Gotham Knights version here. And I know that Gotham Knights is meant to be separated from the Arkham universe, even though Warner Bros. Montreal did make Arkham Origins. But, I mean, come on. Like, God, I really wish that there was a way to kind of compound the best qualities of either of these figures into just one solid definitive Nightwing figure that I can feel proud to have in my collection. To end on a much more positive note though, McFarlane Toys does have the accessories on the DC Collectibles Arkham City Nightwing beat. He has the Billy clubs right about right here, except they're just very generic. There's no paint applications. There's nothing grandiose about their design choices. They're just meant to be kind of, you know, standard Billy clubs for him to hold. And they're just this straightforward piece of black plastic. Whereas the McFarlane Toys version, they are not only billy clubs, but they're also meant to be kind of like these electric rods that do clip onto the back portion here of his suit, and upon removing them, you can see they have an awful lot more of detail and paint applications to kind of balance that out with, of course, the traditional aesthetic of the blue on black with some strips of white here towards the end. Other than that, they don't do anything to really stand out. You know, they're not cleverly made or, you know, they're nothing to write home about terribly. But in terms of comparisons, this is at least a bit more effort put on the Billy Clubs for Nightwing than DC Collectibles was able to do. So at least we do have an additional amount of heft and quality behind his traditional weapon of choice that he actually gets versus other members of the Gotham Knights. Wink, 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 nudge, nudge. But at least that's one thing that McFarlane was able to excel at. Other than that, of course, there is a little bit of a bias here that maybe Nightwing is not necessarily my favorite out of the Bat family, so to speak. But he can still have his moments that make him a very compelling character, whether it be in the comics, the video games, or the movies. And frankly, in Arkham City, he was in fact a compelling character. And the figure, despite its hindrances with what was allowed at the time in terms of articulation and build quality, he is still able to resonate with me a little better than a much more contemporary McFarlane figure from a new Batman-related game that doesn't happen to have Batman in it. And because of that, I would say this figure still holds up and is able to stand on his own versus the likes of McFarlane Toys. And because of that, I would say that if you're a completist and you are looking to own the entire wave of the upcoming Gotham Knights line, then sure, go ahead and pick up Nightwing. However, as it stands, you would have to be a huge Nightwing stand to be able to add this guy to your collection. Otherwise, you're good on passing him up for now. At least maybe wait on a potential discount from your favorite retailer, or put it on your wish list to ask for it as a gift from a friend or family member when a certain occasion comes up. But if Nightwing is in fact one of your favorite characters and you want to add him to your McFarlane collection, use the link in the description below. It helps out the channel quite a lot and I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. Check out this other McFarlane toy review showing up on screen right now if you're interested, and as always, stay humble. I'll see you on the next one.